Dr. Mark Tanghese here with your Science Moment. Today I'm going to talk about narratives and how is it that children get up to speed so quickly on all of the cultural background of society and the narratives that are sort of common knowledge, common intelligent member of society knows these particular narratives. And I've got kids that are sort of coming of age and, sort of finishing their teens. And it seems as if they went from around 12 years old, where they kind of know, they know lots of things, but they're not really up to speed on the narratives of society so much, or maybe a little bit. And then suddenly by the time they're 16, 17, they're kind of 80% there. They seem to have, how can it be that all of the rich adult sort of common sense notions that pull us together as one community can be absorbed by them so quickly? Now, one thing that it comes up, and we've talked about this before, concerns narratives and what are narratives. And there's the similarities to what a narrative is, a social narrative, to blockchain in some particular respects that I've talked about before. And the reason, and there's similar reasons why you have to have that. Both of them do not rely or cannot rely on, and the entire point for blockchain is to not rely on a centralized bank to record the ledger of who gave what money to who else, right? The whole point is for it to be decentralized. And so instead of having a centralized bank, blockchain keeps memory of all of these transactions of who gave some crypto coin to somebody else on a ledger that's on lots and lots of, tens of thousands or millions potentially of computers decentralized around there. And each week, let's say, or each period of time, there's a new block of transactions. Here's the transactions that happened this week. And there's something called proof of work, and then there's something called proof of stake, which are proof of stake is very sort of has a nice social analogy. Those people who are richer with that kind of cryptocurrency have a greater ability to decide whether the new block is legit in some sense to be added to the blockchain, to the history of all of the transactions that occurred. And then proof of work is a way of making it very hard for people have to work very hard doing some kind of arbitrary math problem. It doesn't really matter what it is. And the first person that can solve this problem, and it's really easy to verify that they solved it when they do, but they're the ones that can then say, yes, this new block is legit, and then it gets added, and it's sort of added mathematically to the continuing chain. And the key, why it's important that it be difficult to solve that problem, is that way nobody can come later and say, hey, I have my own claim about the history of all of these transactions, such that everybody gave them to me. And it goes back years before, because in order to have, let's say, another blockchain with multiple, where you're trying to create a fake history, a fake narrative that never in fact happened, you have to solve thousands and thousands of these problems, and each one is the limits of what's computable at all. So no one can then go about and fake an entire history, much less even if they tried. It's already decentralized, distributed amongst all of these different heads or these different computers. The same thing happens. So the problem in cryptocurrency is that you have to come up with these weird schemes, like I just mentioned, to ensure that people aren't cheating. That I say, I gave Doug some crypto coin, but later I claim not to have, and then I just give the same crypto coin to somebody else. Double spending, that's called. The same thing happens in social networks more generally, which is concerning how we spend our reputation and how we engage in using it to get things done and to push the wills of those around us. When we are involved in conversation, I might push reputation and say, look, I really am sure. So let's just do it my way, because I'm sure that it works, because I've done it before, or I've seen Susie do it, whatever it might be. And it turns out that I'm wrong, then I lose that reputation that I pushed onto the table, so to speak, and convincing you to do that particular plan, say. And we do this all the time. Expressly Human, this new book by Dr. Tim Barber and I, is all about how emotional expressions are the ways that we go about showing confidence in our beliefs or disconfidence in your beliefs, and by doing so, we are pushing reputation in a particular mathematical sense onto the table. But the problem is, if no one's paying attention in the community, if I could just say, yeah, I lost I could lose a whole bunch of reputation to you, but if no one keeps track of it, then I can still claim to be highly reputable, and no one would know. And the reason that we know, and the reason is that in social networks, people keep track, and the way they keep track is in a very blockchain-like way. Over time, they keep track of, added to the new week of saying, okay, here's all the ups and downs of reputation that occurred in our social community, and they concerned, a bunch of people, this is like proof of work, a bunch of people who might come up with a story that sort of summarizes the week's rises and falls, and the person that comes up with a really, really elegant story that explains it nicely, a short explanation of all the stuff that happened, that Kevin lost reputation and Susie gained reputation because they got into some argument about pie, and it turns out that Kevin, or whatever I said, was wrong. And you do this, and he's always wrong, which is why also what explains earlier the week when he was talking with Sandy, and this, so you come up with some nice, elegant explanation. It's really hard to find that explains all the facts of that week. And it explains sort of the facts, but more importantly, what it's really about is explaining the changes in reputation currency, who got more and who got less. And that gossip spreads around, and higher stake people, higher reputation people are more likely to be able to decide whether that's a good a new addition to the gossip blockchain, in some sense, to the social narrative. So that's then handles the problem to make sure that, we're keeping track of the social currency, the reputation in our social community, and people can't just say willy-nilly whatever they like that their reputation is. But what's interesting about, and I'll get back to one idea. This is just sort of a thought about how it is that children come to be knowing the narrative so quickly. The key thing about cryptocurrency, the blockchain is entirely all about who got which cryptocurrency and who lost cryptocurrency. It's just transactions. It doesn't say that you gave me a Bitcoin for my car. It doesn't record any of that. It's just recording that I happen to get more Bitcoin and you happen to lose, and then you sent it to me, right? And because that's really what it's about. It's needing to keep track of the actual cryptocurrency transactions and not what they were for in the world. And on the social narrative side, and the reason that we have social narratives is, on the one hand, it does keep track in some sense about the activities of that week, that John did this and Susie did that, and there were these kinds of arguments. But that's its secondary role. The first and main role of gossip in this way of thinking is to keep track of the reputation currency changes, and to do it in a decentralized way, because there is no centralized bank of reputation. And so, on the one hand, so you need to get the reputation changes right, and the story can be it can't be entirely wrong, because that's not going to help you explain the next step. And you're going to have to get close to the truth, but the truth can be bent in some sense, because that's secondary. The main point, the main selection pressure on social narratives is to get the reputation changes right. And so you'll end up with a history of, social communities more generally, end up with are selected for having these narratives which are kind of bendy in terms of how true they are, and they're much more likely to get their reputations right. And of course, I'm sure they get those things wrong sometimes as well. And then it occurred to me that, as I was thinking about these things, well, this is, part of the reason that they work as well as they do is because, like this proof of work analogy that I gave before, the gossip that gets added on to the end of the social narrative and extends the narrative to making it longer and longer, including the current history of society, is selected to be really, really elegant, really, really elegant explanation. And that means it's really easy to remember. The ones that are added on, the new additions to the story are make it such that the entire story is easy to remember. The narratives have been selected over time to be easy to remember, to be easy to learn. Partly that's one of the mathematical things that helps make it immutable, the narrative to be really hard to change. And the other part is just, of course, that's what is going to allow everybody in the community to just keep track of whose reputations are high and whose are low. And so this fits this intuition about how it is that children suddenly get up to speed too quickly, frankly. And all of the cultural and all of the history and the facts and the stories of all the things that sort of we all think that we know, many of which, maybe they're true, maybe they're not, but we all come to agree and share that kind of narrative so quickly. So the reason I think it's so quickly is because narratives are selected to be incredibly easy to remember, incredibly nicely elegant stories. But another part of this, as you start thinking this through, is that what it means is that a lot of what we take to be history really is, not only is it easy to remember, but it can also be, it's secondary to recording the reputation transactions. Really, it can't be that false, but it's trying to remember that things are approximately right, but really it's often bending the truth, which is of course what we always find. The social narratives are sort of rough, vague, barely approximations to the truth, and that kind of fits. A lot of what we all take for granted, and that's in Wikipedia, usually is wrong. But there's something slightly right about it, which explains why it got to be part of the narrative, and it's very hard to ever go away. A lot of my discoveries on, let's say, pruning rain treads, a lot of these different kinds of things, still in Wikipedia it says the stuff that's been around for 100 years. It's very hard to get the old stuff to go away. But another consequence, so let's just back. One, they're designed to be really easy to learn, which explains why kids learn them so quickly. How can they get up to speed on all of this richness so quickly? Well, it's because it's designed for them too. It's not as rich as you think. They're bendy. They're close approximations, they're sort of far approximations to the truth, because they're really concerned with keeping track of reputation. That's what narrative's main purpose is. And this then leads to a third observation, is that they're really about the reputation changes, which means they're about the individuals in society or the groups in society whose reputations have gone up or down. That is, the very packaging of what we package up as history and as knowledge itself, and it's not just history, it's knowledge. So for example, so that when we're talking about history and knowledge and all of the kinds of things that we should know, they are, I think, this would predict that they tend to be wrapped up in particular groups or particular individuals for which there's reputation that we attribute. So for example, isn't it strange that it's almost impossible to have a conversation about special relativity or general relativity without Einstein as the center of the story, right? This is strange. You might imagine that there's like aliens and other civilizations who discovered special relativity and general relativity, and it has no connection to any particular personality, right? But for us, the story of this particular aspect of the narrative of what no one even understands what general relativity is, much less special, and special relativity as well. No one really gets it. But when the story comes up, it's all about Einstein. And I think that if one walks through many different kinds of cases of what we all seem to know, they are often attached to a particular group or a particular community or a particular person, that it's really about that person with exact cartoon characterizations of their personality type. You can often imagine what they would be like in an argument or a debate. There's often packaging up sort of also not just their reputation, but also aspects of their personality type that helps you predict the way they would behave in other situations. So I think, and this is sort of, some of these things are stuff that's still ongoing, and the thought processes towards an eventual next book, and the stuff that we're doing at freex.group, our Free Expression Institute, is trying to understand social narratives, their mathematical structure, how they underlie all of the knowledge that we have, and then byproducts of these, which are the kinds that we're talking about, that they tend to be, that all of our common knowledge tends to get wrapped around individual stories of individuals with personalities, with reputation changes. The truth itself is secondary. It's not as important as keeping track of those things. So it tends to be in terms of being true or false. And the stories, though, tend to be easy to remember, ridiculously easy to remember, so that even children way too young to possibly have learned that much suddenly click and can get by understanding the stuff we claim to know in society. And that was your science moment. Go ahead and get yourself a copy of Dr. Tim Barber in my book, Expressly Human, Decoding the Language of Emotion. It's about these kinds of things. It's the foundations of these kinds of questions concerning how knowledge in society works, how social networks work, how truth is found in society, and how emotional expressions work, what they are, and why we have them.